Hi, Psych. How you doing? April 1st. Happy April today. Um, anyway, hope everybody's doing well. Um, any questions you have on stuff coming up this week, let me know. I posted anything about the archetype assignment and moved it to the assignments. I put it in the wrong spot, so that should be fixed by now. Also, I've started grading. If any of you shouldn't be able to see your grades, but if you can, please let me know because I want to make sure I get that fixed. Okay. All right. We move on now then to section number 2 in personality, and we're going to be on the. Give me just a second here. We're skipping a page. We're going to be on, I believe it is page 5. You should be under where it says social learning. It'd be C, letter C. And right below that's a picture of a guy with a big old head. That's a guy we'll talk about in a little bit here, okay, on the next page. But first, I want to get into the different types of what's called conditioning. Because basically, social learning, we've talked about this, behaviorism, it's the same thing, is the idea that to varying degrees, you and I and whoever can be trained to do just about anything through the use of reinforcements. Whether you're conscious of it, in the case of what's called classical conditioning, which we'll do first, or not conscious of it, sorry, or whether you're conscious of it, which is called operant, and I'll give you that stuff in a minute, okay? So the first thing I want to spend a little time on is classical conditioning. And this is, you've already had this happen to you, well, many times in your life, but in class, when I did the thing with Emily, with lifting my arms up and then running at her and so on and so forth. That was a type of classical conditioning. Okay? So what I'm going to give you first is the classic all-time example. Then we'll talk about the thing with Emily and see how that relates. Okay? There's a guy named Ivan Pavlov. You're not going to need to know his name for the test or anything, but Ivan Pavlov, Pavlov, if you want to look him up. He did this famous experiment where he was actually working with dogs, feeding them. It had nothing to do with psychology, but it ended up being psychology. So anyway, he had these dogs in these cages, and he would go to feed them every day, roughly the same time. Well, what ended up happening was he noticed that every time the door opened and he started bringing the food, the dogs would start salivating. Like your dog. Think about what your dog does. Those of you who have a pet. When they cue, they behave a certain way to certain words, or the door opening, or maybe the garage door opening, or some sort of signal, if you will. And they know that it's time for food, it's time to go walk, it's time to go to the bathroom or whatever. Okay, it's the same basic idea. So what ends up happening, he notices that the dog starts salivating every time he opens the door. Okay? So then, I'm just going to tell the whole story, then I'll break it down in parts. So then, he decides, what's going to happen if I put something ahead of this to see if they're reacting to the food or to something else? So he puts a bell, attaches it to the door. Like, you've been to a store where you open the door and the bell rings, so it tells them somebody's there. So then what he noticed was that every time he rang the bell or opened the door to the bell and the bell rang, the dog started salivating. Okay? So then he's like, what happens if I don't bring any food in? So then he does. He opens the door with no food and the bell, and the dogs still salivate because they've learned to associate the bell with food. And then after he did that for a few days, or I forget how long it was, after a while, then the dog stopped salivating because they didn't associate food with the bell anymore. Okay? So that's the famous experiment. Now, to break this down, you have 4 parts, and I'm going to use my big old dry erase board here. Okay? So underneath where it says conditioning, 2 types, I want you to put classical, just the word classical. Okay? And then put... I made this too large, I guess. Try to make this those four things: US, UR, CS, CR. Okay? And then I've made a key for you. Here's what each of those letters stands for. Unconditioned is U, conditioned is C, stimulus is S, and response is R. Okay, so if you just make that little chart, you should be able to figure out what's going on. Okay? So, I'm going to give you the Pavlov story since it's kind of fresh, what each of those were. Okay, then we can work on definitions. Okay, so US stands for unconditioned stimulus. That was the food. Okay. Unconditioned response, the dog's slobbering. Okay, the dog's slobbering to the food. The conditioned stimulus, this is what he changed. Okay, this was the bell. So the conditioned stimulus is the bell. And then the conditioned response, CR, is the dog salivating to the bell because they associate the bell with the food. Okay? So again, unconditioned stimulus was the food. Unconditioned response was salivating to the food. Conditioned stimulus is the bell. And then conditioned response is salivating to the bell. All right? So if you want definitions, unconditioned stimulus, I guess I'll write this down sort of. Frankly, it's real simple here. Stimulus that exists separately, I guess, or independently. It's just something that happens. Okay? The unconditioned response is the reaction to the unconditioned stimulus. I'll hold those up so you can see them. Okay, and don't forget you always pause this stuff to do it. I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. Okay. Next, the conditioned stimulus. The experimenter changes. Let's say he adds something. Okay, that's the adding the bell associating with the food. Okay. And then the conditioned response is the reaction, as you might guess, to the conditioned stimulus. So there are those definitions. Okay. So let's go back to Emily's situation here. Okay. Here, in theory, when I ran at her, okay, I should have probably, if I'd have done this right, I'd run at her first. Okay. So me running at her, and then her reaction was the freaking out, and then I forget, was it Dakota back there freaked out? Even worse. So the freak out, we'll call it. Okay. This would be me adding the arms. Okay, if I went in later and did those arms, okay, the next day you associate the arms with the running, and then you would freak out, even though you wouldn't freak out as much because you know I'm not going to hurt you already, and it's already happened, so you're kind of used to it all a little bit and all that, so it's not as big a deal. Okay, so it's not a perfect example, but it is an example of this. Okay? So if you have any questions about that, let me know. That is classical conditioning. And the other thing I would have you put is that this is done not really consciously. Okay? Dogs don't think, oh, look, the door opened. Now here comes my food. They just know that sound means food, which is why they come to the door to greet you. And then if you don't have food, but you do. But a lot of times you, sorry, buddy, I don't have food for you right now. And if you did that every day, then they would stop associating with the garage door with the food. Okay, they don't think, oh, there's food. And it's something that you learn. And we do it more, we react to bells, we react to fire drill things, maybe loud noises that you've associated with a certain thing. I think I told you a story of my grandpa once. He was in World War II, and one day um, my friend and I put this firework thing on his car battery as a prank, just for fun. And so when he starts the car up, it made it like that, and he freaked out, like went into this whole and he later told me he recovered after a minute or so, but he told me that that was exactly the same sound of this bomb that the Germans used against him. I forget, screaming Mimi, I think, something like that. But it made that exact kind of sound, and he had flashback, frankly, and I felt obviously beyond horrible. And I've never done anything like that since, but it was a good example, I think, of sort of a classical conditioning. That all it took was just, well, not probably one time, but a very, important moment in his life. And yeah, there it was. So, you know what? Let's go ahead and stop there. I'm going to break this into smaller sections. The next section is going to be about Skinner and operant conditioning, and then we're going to break down into several others. So we got 3 or 4 or 5 lectures. So this will take a little while. This is a slow section. So if you have any questions on that, let me know today. I'm not going to post this, and don't worry about it. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye. See ya.